Find a quiet place and enjoy them. Let's go. The first story. Honestly, when my friends and I rented a cabin in Vermont, I never could have expected how things would turn out. It was the four of us in a cramped car. Driving up there, the cabin was directly by a lake. It was on this road that had the lake in front of the house, across the street. And then in the backyard was a dense forest. There were some huge houses on this road, and some smaller, more rustic-looking ones. This was one of the more modest-looking ones. It had 4 bedrooms, so a bedroom for each of us. The houses were spaced out on this road, creating a sense of privacy. And the whole time, we were unloading the car out front. Not a single car passed by on this road. The interior of the house was decent. It wasn't spectacular, but it was modest, clean, and the owners were really pushing a cabin theme with the wall decor. I guess it would make sense considering the location. There was even a decorative canoe in one corner of the living room, behind the TV. The living room looked out to the back deck, which then looked out to the forest. The view was amazing. The deck wasn't elevated very high off the ground. It was just 2 steps down and onto the grass. We all claimed our bedrooms. I managed to get one of the rooms with a view of the forest. The first thing we did after settling in was, of course, walking outside and sitting by the lake. We all went in the water at one point and then played frisbee. We were definitely by the lake for a few hours. We seemed to be the only ones there, apart from this older-looking couple way down the shore. Afterwards, we went out to eat and then started bar hopping in the nearby town. When we Ubered back, it was dark out. We went outside by the lake to mess around and play late-night frisbee. While we were kind of drunk, as I was running to grab the frisbee after missing a catch, I noticed something in the water. The moon reflecting on the lake was the only reason I could see it, I said.
What the is that?
Out loud, and then realized it was a person standing in the water, about waist deep. My friends looked over and said they saw it too. It was only a little weird because of the time. It was like past midnight. But hey, if a local wants to go for a midnight swim, that's their business. We then went to sit on the deck and drank beers for a while until we got tired. And one by one, everyone started going inside to go to sleep. My friend Tom and I were the last ones out there. I had been, every once in a while, glancing in the direction I saw that person before in the water, just out of curiosity. And so eventually, when I shot a glance in that direction, I spotted someone standing on the shore. They appeared to be just standing there, facing us. It was kind of creepy, maybe a neighbor. I didn't want to be rude, but I wondered if it was the same person. We tried to ignore it, but Tom was facing that person, and after a while, he said they were still just standing there, facing us. I stood up and looked over, and saw he was right. I yelled out,
Is everything okay?
Tom asked.
Why'd you do that?
I honestly didn't know what I was expecting. They didn't even reply anything though. We were officially creeped out, so we went inside. The other 2, Mike and Liam, were already in their room, probably knocked out from drinking. So Tom and I decided to just call it a night too, so that we could have a full day tomorrow. If I had to guess, it was 12:30 to 1 a.m., which was honestly on the earlier side. But we were all burnt out from the long day. I went to my room after brushing my teeth. I looked out the window, wanting to take a look at the forest before crawling into bed. This is where the creepiness factor escalated substantially, because there was now someone standing in front of the back deck, facing the house. I felt like they were facing my window. The figure of the person appeared to be male, considering the slightly larger frame. It was undoubtedly the same person from before. I called Tom's name. He didn't reply, so I ran to his room and banged on his door, telling him to come out. He came out pretty quickly, and I led him to my window to look outside. But now the person was gone. I swore to him that the person from earlier was just standing as still as before, right in front of our deck. He believed me. We weren't about to go outside and look around though. I took one more look to make sure that they were still gone. and then I shut the blind to the bedroom window. But as I lay awake in bed, rolling from side to side, trying to sleep, I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still outside. Who was that person? Why were they creeping around? My thoughts were interrupted by the sickening sound of a fist knocking on the bedroom window. I felt like my insides just shriveled up, and my heart completely dropped out of my body. I laid silent and frozen. Moments later, another light set of knocks on the glass. I didn't dare lift the blind, though I couldn't gather the courage to. I almost yelled, "Who is it?" but I stopped myself. Instead, I ran out to the living room, screaming for everyone to wake up. Everyone, one by one, came out of their rooms. No one was at the window when we checked. All four of us went out to the deck and turned on the lights to the deck. We looked out onto the shore and didn't see anyone. We also checked the front and sides of the house. No one. Tom and I had to explain to the other two what they missed when they fell asleep. We kept the backyard lights on that night. The next day, Tom and I went to the two nearest neighbors and asked them if they had also experienced someone knocking on their windows or doors. One of the neighbors told us a genuinely freaky encounter he had a week earlier. Someone knocked on their door in the middle of the night, and when he asked who it was, they wouldn't answer and just kept knocking, so he didn't answer the door. I'm not sure if it was connected, but if it was, that just makes this even scarier. We spent the rest of the day by the lake, exploring nearby towns and hitting bars. Nothing happened that night. We left the next day. I still wonder what I would have seen if I had lifted the blind. The second story, when my cousin James and I were in our early 20s, we went on several camping trips around Oregon. This incident occurred, I believe, when I was 21 and he was 22, and it took place in Redwood National Park. It was my first time camping there, but not James's. It was the middle of the week. Our jobs allowed us to have weekdays off, and we'd often go camping then to avoid crowds and traffic. I always let James take charge on these trips. He's the one with the camping expertise, not me. We parked near a picnic area and ventured into the woods from there. After about 15 minutes of hiking deeper into the forest, we found a suitable spot to set up camp. A good spot meant a clearing big enough for 2 tents, the portable stove, and a campfire. The first thing we did was unpack our stuff and set up our tents. James has always been much faster than me at pitching a tent. He does it in just a few minutes. It always takes me over 20 minutes. Or rather, it always took me over 20 minutes, as I haven't been camping in the wilderness since. Next, we created a ring of stones for a fire and gathered some sticks and wood. He did bring some fire starter and a lighter, so I guess we kind of cheated, but oh well. It was late afternoon by then. We had a fire going, and James was grilling up some steaks and burgers. One thing about James is he always went all out with the food on these trips, and he's a really good cook, so I always trusted him with feeding us. Of course, we had our bear spray in case the smell of the food attracted a bear, which James always said was very unlikely. He always said the real thing you had to worry about in the middle of the woods was other people. As we ate our steaks and burgers, we cracked open some beers and played some classic rock on the speaker. If you've never been camping, you don't understand how great moments like this are in the wilderness with a friend or family member. Some beers, reminiscing about good times, and listening to music. As it got dark, we started playing card games on this little folding table. We brought specifically 4 cards. After playing more traditional card games, we started playing Go. This was when we heard something out in the woods. I paused the music on my phone, so the speaker went silent. It was clear now. We heard someone humming and footsteps from beyond the trees in the pitch-black forest. James urged me to find the flashlight. I tried, but by the time I found it, the sounds had faded away. I asked James if that was something to be concerned about, and he said it was definitely unusual for someone else to be this deep in the woods, let alone creepily walking by a campsite with an active campfire, humming loudly. I was a bit shaken, and I saw James was too. We went back to playing cards, with the music much lower now. When we least expected it, a big stick landed in the middle of our campsite, making us both jump out of our skin. It didn't fall from a tree. This thing was thrown at us by someone. James started yelling something along the lines of,
"Whoever's out there messing with us, get a life."
and then footsteps could be heard once again in the distance. They were walking away from us. I said we should pack up camp and move somewhere else. He said, absolutely not in the dark. We both had bear spray, and he advised me to just keep it next to me in my tent when we go to sleep. It was the closest thing to a ranged self-defense weapon we had. We kept hearing sounds like tree branches cracking in the distance, sounds that you would never expect an animal to be making. Someone was out there, maybe multiple people, that much was clear. We had to go to sleep eventually, so we agreed that maybe we should take turns staying up to keep watch, to make sure no one comes to our campsite to steal anything or worse. James agreed to take first watch. He said he'd stay up and read his book. So I crawled into my tent and then my sleeping bag and went to sleep. Waking up in the middle of the night while camping is normal. You're in a cold outdoor environment and an uncomfortable sleeping bag. Any number of things could wake you up. I didn't yet know what woke me up. I was still in a fog. My brain didn't feel fully woken up yet. I looked up and saw a head peering into my tent. It looked like James. I rubbed my eyes, but really, it was the darkness that was preventing me from seeing any of his face. I said,
"James?
thinking he was waking me up to take my turn of keeping watch. I said grudgingly.
Is it my turn?"
I stared at the head peering at me in my sleeping bag, slowly growing more awake every second. Then I heard the zipper to the tent quickly zip up, and his head disappeared. I laid back down in my sleeping bag, but only for a second. I suddenly had some weird moment of clarity, where I shot to an upright position and listened as the footsteps walked away.
"James?"
I said. He didn't answer. I unzipped my tent to peek out to the campsite. The fire was dead, and James wasn't out there. I went over to James's tent, which was zipped up. I unzipped it and looked inside to see James fast asleep in his sleeping bag. I got chills, goosebumps, whatever you want to call it. I almost lost it at the realization. I started shaking him awake, and when he finally awoke, I told him someone was here at the campsite. It took him a minute to come back to reality, just like I did, but when he did, he grabbed his bear spray. He said he must have dozed off while reading. He said I should sleep in the tent with him tonight, but to do that, I'd need my sleeping bag. He came outside of the tent with me and stood watch. I ran to my tent to grab my sleeping bag. In my tent, grabbing my sleeping bag, I heard that same humming again from outside. I grabbed it, and James whispered at me to hurry up. I said,
"You hear that too?"
He said.
Yes.
We both got back in his tent and zipped it up, with our cans of bear spray by our sides. I tell you, in those moments, I wanted nothing more than for a bear to come and save the day. The hours dragged on as I stayed up while James slept. After 3 long, horrible hours, I woke him up, and we switched. When James woke me up, it was almost dawn. There was light outside, so we packed everything up, and by the time we were done, there was plenty of light to hike back to the car. While we could have driven somewhere else and had another night of camping elsewhere, neither of us were feeling it anymore. This was a haunting experience, and I think we both just wanted to be in the safety of our houses. It's been 6 years since this happened, and he's hit me up a few times since then about camping, but I haven't really had any interest since this experience. People are just as scary. Why was someone out there stalking our campsite? The sight of that person's head in the dark, just looking into my tent, was straight out of a nightmare. I may never go camping again. The last story. I was 11 years old when this happened. For some reason, I was home alone one evening, so I was playing video games in my room upstairs. I wasn't allowed to answer the door to anyone when I was home alone. Whenever I was left alone, it was never for long. My dad would just be out running errands or something similar. I was playing The Legend of Zelda on my Nintendo Switch. I used to be obsessed with that game. I heard the house phone downstairs start to ring. My dad always told me to pick up the phone if it rang, in case it was him calling. So I hurried downstairs, and by maybe the fourth ring, I picked up. The caller ID was from my dad's cell phone, he said.
Buddy, can you come outside and help with the groceries?
I replied.
Dad?
He said back.
Yes.
I felt like something sounded off with his voice. You obviously know your own dad's voice. And so even at such a young age, when I was questioning why it didn't sound like him, I said,
Why do you sound like that?
He replied.
Like what, buddy?
And I hung up. My dad would never use the word buddy like that, especially twice in a matter of seconds. The phone rang again, and my dad's number came up on the caller ID again. I ignored it. For some reason, my heart was racing. I was nervous. I sat in the living room, waiting to see if the phone would ring a third time, and it did. It took a couple of minutes before the third ringing, but when I checked the caller ID this time, it was a different number. I picked up, and a woman's voice on the other end said,
Hey, Jessica, I know this is going to sound weird, but it's your mom. I'm outside. I have a lot to explain.
I hung up right then and there. My mom passed away when I was 4. I have no memories of her. My suspicion was in fact true, that the first voice I heard was not my dad's. The phone rang again, and then again after that. I ignored it. Each time, I couldn't even call my dad, because someone clearly had his phone. Then things took a turn for the worse when there were knocks at the front door. This went from a someone has my dad's phone situation to a someone is outside the house situation. My dad would not be knocking on the door. He'd have a key, obviously. I peered around the wall of the living room to look at the front door. I heard a woman's muffled voice on the other side, saying my name. She was saying,
It's your mom.
She rang the doorbell, and then I heard her start attempting to open the door. I did something that number 11-year-old should ever have to do, and that was grabbing the phone and calling 911. The 911 operator asked me what I imagined to be some pretty standard questions, most importantly telling me to wait in a bathroom or other room with a lockable door until the police get there. The bathroom is on the first floor of the house. I hid in there with the lights off. Whoever was outside came to the window and tried pulling it open. I heard their entire struggle. Then they must have moved to the next window. I think they tried every window and door in the house. If anything were to have been unlocked, this story would have had a very different outcome. They must have given up at some point before the police arrived. And I say they because clearly there were 2 people involved in this, a man and a woman. They both could have been out there for all I know. The operator told me that the police are at the front door now, and it's safe to go meet them there. Only when I opened the door to the police was when I hung up the phone. They did a quick investigation inside and outside of the house and asked me where my dad was supposed to be and if my dad knew anyone who might want to hurt us. I'm sure I said I thought he was running errands or something and not that I know of. My dad returned home with my younger brother in a panic when he saw the police cars out front. My dad's phone was stolen, which was already clear. I'm sure that our address, home phone number, and other personal information was stored somewhere on the phone, easily accessible, though how they knew my name, I'm not exactly sure. Something on my dad's phone must have given it away. It was an old flip phone. Who stole it was a mystery. But my dad's phone background was a picture of him with my younger brother and me. This could have been an indication to some disgusting, creepy couple out there that the owner of this phone was a single dad with 2 young kids. And they tried to use that as a way of tricking me into leaving the house, which is absolutely disgusting and horrific. The phone must have been destroyed after the failed attempts at trying to lure me outside. Things were a little different after this. My dad wouldn't leave me alone anymore at night. Not until I was a few years older, at least. Don't forget to subscribe to the Kryptic Scares channel and leave your thoughts about the story. Do you have a scary experience you want featured in one of my videos? Please write it in as much detail and as completely as possible, and send it to my Gmail, choduk82573@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.